What's the one thing that you put out in the world with your podcast that more people see than other things? I think you'll be surprised. It's not your episode titles, it's your podcast description. And today I want to talk about how we can possibly improve our podcast description with ChatGPT. This is stuff from Coffee Like Media. If you need help doing any of this, either by coming on here and having me help you coach through using ChatGPT in voice or in text function, or you want something more private, or you want somebody else to help massage your messaging for you, hi, I have some services and you can find all of that information in the links below if you're watching this on YouTube. Like and subscribe if you are. And in podcast form, it'll be in the show notes for you. If for some reason it is not a clickable link in any of those places that you're looking, AI and podcasting.substack.com is where you can find all of the information and more, as well as the newsletter version of this that'll come with a few more treats for you on AI and podcasting, as the name suggests. Okay, let's get into this. I want to spend time on this. I want to do this because the past week has been death and taxes for me, and I just need a big distraction of creativity. And I've got a new episode coming out with an actual guest, not just chatty. And but that's taking me some editing to do. And so I want to dive into this one with just me and chatty today. So let's do this. I've got a bunch of different podcasts that I really like and admire, and I think they represent themselves in different interesting ways. So I'm going to be feeding chatty not just the context of who they are, what their expertise is, but also some examples of like tone and information and stuff like that from podcasts that I know. I'm going to be using the voice prompt on my phone throughout this because I don't feel like reading any more text than I've been reading. Did I mention taxes is one of the things I've been swamped in? Okay, yeah, so my eyes are crossing and my heart is breaking and all kinds of things are happening, and let's just do this. Okay, so I guess I have to turn my phone up really loud and point chatty at the screen and hope that I can do this today. She's been fickle this week. Hello there. And okay, I need some help with some writing for my podcast.
Sure, I'd be happy to help. What kind of writing do you need for your podcast? Is it an intro, a script, or something else?
Okay, it's actually the podcast description. And I've got some examples, and I'd like to share those with you before we before we massage mine. Can you ask me 3 questions for each example, but one at a time? And at the end of each question, ask me if I'm ready to move on to the next question. Is that okay?
That sounds like a good plan. Go ahead and share the first example, and we can start from there.
Okay, so the 3 questions I want you to ask me are: 1, what is good about this example? 2, how do you want this example to relate to what we change in your podcast description? And 3, what's missing from this example? Are you ready for the first example?
Yes, I'm ready. Please share the first example with me.
Okay. So this is a podcast called List Envy from Mark Steadman. And it says, High Fidelity meets Bullseye in this funny and fascinating list-building podcast. Each week, host Mark Steadman talks to a new guest, and together they collaborate on a top 5 list with the topic chosen by the guest. Some episodes will have you screaming into your earbuds asking, why did Mark pick that? While others give you a whole new world to explore. Subjects range from science and tech to food, travel, pop culture, and the human mind. Guests have included inventors, comedians, musicians, scientists, and Hollywood screenwriters. New episodes come out every Tuesday.
Let's dive into the first question. What do you think is good about this example? Are you ready to answer?
I am. I really like the different parts that he has to it. I like that he describes what's in it, but he also describes kind of the resistance that, or the, not the resistance, but the reaction that the listener might have. So there's emotions in it. And then I like how he explains when it comes out.
That's a solid analysis. Now, how do you want this example to relate to what we change in your podcast description? Are you ready to answer?
I am. Yeah, I would like to add the elements I don't have from what I just described to you. Should I read off my podcast description now and we can change it as we go?
Yes, that would be helpful. Go ahead and read off your podcast description, and we can start making changes based on what you've shared.
Okay. How can we best use ChatGPT and other AI tools to reach the people we want to connect to with our podcast? I'll be sharing ideas as I take serious deep dives into these tools one at a time. The current season is using ChatGPT. Meta.
Let's start with the third question about the example you shared earlier. What do you think is missing from that example? Are you ready to answer?
Well, sure, but can you tell me what you think is missing?
Sure. One thing that might be missing from the example is a more specific call to action or a unique selling point that clearly distinguishes the podcast from others. It might also benefit from more detailed examples of the kinds of guests or topics to expect beyond just broad categories. Now, sorry, I'm having issues right now. Did not understand what you said.
I didn't say anything. Please continue.
All right. Given what's good about the example you provided and what might be missing, let's look at your description. Your current description is informative, but could benefit from a bit more detail and emotional appeal. We can add a brief description of the podcast's tone or style, a hint at the emotional reactions listeners might have, clearer details on the release schedule, highlighting the variety or uniqueness of the content. Would you like to start making these changes?
Yeah, I would. Please ask me those one at a time and I'll give you the information to add.
Sure. Let's start with the tone or style of your podcast. How would you describe the tone or style you aim for in your podcast?
Absolutely. I would say it's practical, experimental, and yet playful.
Great. Next, how would you like to describe the emotional reactions or responses you hope your listeners will have to your podcast?
I think it would be curiosity and relief that it doesn't have to be serious and include like a lot of research, like the heaviness of not knowing how to do it and just being playful with it, I think will be relief. I think relief is the biggest one, is what I'm saying.
Understood. Now, could you clarify the release schedule for your podcast? How often do new episodes come out?
That's where I'm not as good as Mark on this one. Not as good as, that's the wrong way to say it. But honestly, I don't have a set schedule and I'm doing that intentionally as its own experiment. So it's released when I find something to experiment with or to show people that I'm already doing. So when I have something to share, that's when I release it. It's been about once or twice a week generally, but it only comes out when there's something super valuable to share with folks as to how to use you, ChatGPT, for their podcast messaging.
Got it. Based on that, we can phrase it as episodes are released when new insights or experiments with ChatGPT are ready to be shared. Does that sound accurate to you?
Highly accurate, a little too formal. Can we be more informal, please?
Sure thing. How about this? New episodes drop whenever there's something cool or useful to share about using ChatGPT for your podcast. Does that capture the casual vibe you're aiming for?
Yeah, sure. That's fine.
Great. Let's summarize the changes we've discussed. We'll describe your podcast as practical, experimental, and playful in tone. Emphasize that listeners might feel curious.
Actually, I trust you on the changes. Can you just make the changes and read out the end result of what the description might look like now?
Absolutely. Here's the updated podcast description incorporating our discussion. Dive into the world of podcasting experimentation with insights from ChatGPT. Discover practical tips and playful explorations as we uncover how to craft compelling podcast messaging. Join us for episodes that drop whenever there's something cool or useful to share about leveraging ChatGPT for your podcast. How does that sound to you?
The tone is not consistent throughout. Can we have it be slightly informal and definitely not use the word dive?
Certainly. Here's a revised version with a more consistent informal tone. Explore the world of podcasting experiments with ChatGPT insights. Get practical tips and playful explorations on crafting compelling podcast messages. Tune in whenever we've got something cool or useful to share about using ChatGPT for your podcast. Does this version better capture the tone you're looking for?
Yes, but the information's a little off. It's for their podcast messaging, like the things they put out into the world in text form about their podcast, like their show notes, their social media posts, their podcast description, anything in text.
Got it. Here's a refined version based on your clarification. Explore the world of podcast messaging with ChatGPT insights. Get practical tips and playful explorations on crafting compelling text for your podcast, whether it's show notes, social media posts, or your podcast description. Tune in whenever we've got something cool or useful to share about using ChatGPT. Does this align more accurately with what you're aiming for?
It does, but now we're missing the how often it comes out. Also, with that list, can you add and more? Because it's not just those three things.
Sure. Let's integrate the frequency and expand the list. Explore the world of podcast messaging.
Cool. I'll look at that in text later. Can we move on to the second example?
Of course. Please go ahead and share the second example.
Okay.
Continue with our questions and adjustments.
Okay, so this one is called Ladies We Need to Talk. It says, sex, health, relationships, frank, funny, furious. Join host Yumi Steins as she rips open the sealed section on life. Ladies We Need to Talk goes deep on the personal stuff that's hard to talk about, even with your closest mates. From the wonders of your vulvas to managing the mental load to the search for orgasms and much more. With sensitivity, personal stories, and serious smarts, this show is for women who feel the squeeze between work, their private lives, and their pelvic floor.
Great. Let's start with the first question for this example.
Okay.
What do you think is good about this description? Are you ready to answer?
I am. Yeah, I think the humor is good, and I think how it describes who the listeners, how it describes who the listeners are, I think is really good as well.
That's a good observation. Now, what do you think is missing from this example? Ready to share your thoughts?
I don't think anything's missing. I think it's really good.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts. Would you like to read off your podcast description now? Or shall we move on to the third example?
I actually think we'll skip the third example. I think these first two and their good points is actually enough to pull into my description. Do you have a new description to read off?
Absolutely. Here's the revised podcast description, incorporating the elements we discussed. Explore the world of podcast messaging with practical tips and playful explorations using ChatGPT insights. Craft compelling text for your podcast, whether it's show notes, social media posts, your podcast description, and more. Episodes drop whenever there's something cool or useful to share about using ChatGPT, typically once or twice a week. How does this version sound to you?
It's okay, but we're missing the emotional relief aspect, and I'm not in it at all. I have a feeling that host Stephanie Fuccio should be in there somewhere.
Got it. Let's integrate those aspects and include your name as the host. Stephanie Fuccio. Here's a revised version.
Okay.
Join host Stephanie Fuccio as we explore the world of podcast messaging with practical tips and playful explorations using ChatGPT insights. Craft compelling text for your podcast, whether it's show notes, social media posts, your podcast description, and more. Tune in for episodes that drop whenever there's something cool or useful to share about using ChatGPT, typically once or twice a week. Discover a podcasting world where practicality meets playfulness, offering emotional relief and insightful perspectives. How does this version sound now?
Oh, I like it. I'm just not sure of the order of things. Part of me wants to front load the ChatGPT and podcasting part to the beginning and end with the emotional stuff and put me somewhere in the middle. I don't need to be at the beginning. I really want the keywords to be at the beginning.
Understood. Let's rearrange it to emphasize ChatGPT and podcasting at the beginning and end with the emotional aspects while placing your name in the middle. Explore the world of podcast messaging with practical tips and playful explorations using ChatGPT insights.
Mm-hmm.
Join host Stephanie Fuccio as we craft compelling text for your podcast, whether it's show notes, social media posts, your podcast description, and more. Discover a podcasting world where practicality meets playfulness, offering insights and emotional relief. Episodes drop whenever there's something cool or useful to share about using ChatGPT, typically once or twice a week. How does this revised order feel to you?
I love it. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. I'm glad we could refine it to your liking. If you need any more help or have other questions for the future, feel free to reach out.
Always tap the white thing when you want Chatty to stop. Otherwise, she'll go on forever summing anything up. And always remember that you can X out, and see the text of the entire conversation at any point. Because these are saved, you can go up to the top menu and click on any of the conversations you've had. You can come back to conversations and continue them. And unlike my own brain, the Chatty will just jump right in, generally speaking. She did better today than yesterday. She actually kicked us out because we hit the limit yesterday on the free stuff. I'm still using the free stuff. I haven't gone over to ChatGPT 4 yet. So I don't love it completely, but it's much better than it is. And it did incorporate the elements that I wanted. And that's the thing. You have to do the prompt chaining. You have to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Sometimes I find it easier to do this in voice, and sometimes I find it easier to do in text. This particular one probably would have been better to do in text, but to be quite honest with you, my brain's melting out. So I decided to go complete voice today and do it that way. But yeah, so the reminders are to use examples. I didn't necessarily tell Chatty what kind of expert she was today because I was taking on the expert hat, the marketing expert hat. I wanted to have the say on what goes where and all that kind of stuff. And I had examples. So I used more of samples than I did pretending that Chatty was a podcast description specialist. And to be quite honest with you, a lot of podcast descriptions are not great. So I didn't want to leave it up to whatever ChatGPT tapped into in the collective podcast description world. That would have tainted my description. So I'm going to use this description. I'm just going to massage it a bit more. I never use exactly what comes out of ChatGPT because I am a control freak. So there's that. But you can do this with any part of your podcasting, messaging being the text that goes out into the world about your podcast, the episodes, you, the host, the things that you do, the events you have, anything at all that's in text, your press releases, literally anything. And we'll dive into more of these with time. I've done a few of them already. And I've been interspersing them with different news and information that I'm finding in other podcasts and news sources that I like to talk about as well. So there's all of that. So I hope this has been useful for you. If your podcast description is a bit anemic, needs some liveliness to it, or just needs your voice, literally use your voice with the ChatGPT app and talk it through how to make it sound more like you and more like the amazing podcast that I'm guessing you probably have. All right, I'm done for the day. This felt really good. Thank you for the distraction, and I hope it helps you. Bye.